Hello and welcome to another section of this complete modern JavaScript course. In this section, we are going to learn about some of the important methods of arrays and strings. These methods can be very useful in achieving certain functionalities, and you as a JavaScript developer will be using these methods a lot in your program. So let's start this section by understanding the map method. Map is an array method. You can use a map method on an array. So the map method of an array, it can be used to transform the elements of an array by applying a callback function to each elements of the source array. And at the end, it returns a new array with the transformed data. Let's try to understand map method with an example. So here I am in the VS Code, and there you will see that we have three arrays. We have a number array, we have this names array, which is storing an array of string values, and we have this products array, which is storing an array of object types. Now, in order to understand what is a map method and how it works, let's take this number array. So as I mentioned before, a map method is an array method. It can be used on an array. And how do we call a map method on an array? On the array, in our case, this number is an array. On that, we can call the map method like this. Okay, and here instead of calling it number, let me call it as numbers, because number is a type in JavaScript. So just to avoid any confusion, I have changed the name from number to numbers here. So this numbers is an array, and on that array, we want to call this map method. So this is how we can call the map method on the array. Now, this map method, it takes an argument, and that argument is nothing but a callback function. Here, for the callback function, you can use anonymous function syntax or arrow function syntax. Here, I'm going to use anonymous function syntax. Okay, so to this map method, we are passing a callback function. For that, we have specified an anonymous function here. Now, inside this function, we can write a logic to transform the data of this numbers array. And finally, we need to return that transformed data. And what this map method will do is, it is going to return us an array with the transformed data. So let's go ahead and let's create a variable, and let's call it maybe transformed array. You can name it anything. So this map method, it is going to return us an array, and that array will be assigned to this transformed array data. Currently, if you see the callback function which we are passing here, from there we are not returning anything. So currently, if I go ahead and if I log the transformed array variable, and if I save the changes, you will see that an array has been logged, and in that array all the elements are undefined. Now why is that? That is because what this map method will do is, it will loop over each element of this numbers array, and for each element it is going to call this function. So the first element of this numbers array is 1. So for that, it is going to execute this function. Now from this function, we are not returning anything. So by default, undefined will be returned, and that will be added to this transformed array. So this map method, at the end, it is going to return us an array. So in that array, the first element will be undefined for this value 1. Then it will iterate over the second element, in this case 4. So for this element also, this callback function will be executed, and since we are not returning anything from here, again undefined will be returned, and that will be added to this transformed array. So the second element also here is undefined, and then it will again loop over the third element. So for the third element also, it is going to execute this callback function. Since from here we are not returning anything, again undefined will be returned, and in this transformed array, the third element called undefined will be added. So that's why you are seeing an array of undefined values. From here, if I go ahead and if I return some value, for example 10, and now if I save the changes, for each iteration, this map method is going to return 10. So now you will see for each element in this array, every time this map method is going to loop over each element of this numbers array, it is going to return 10. So that's why we have an array where all the elements are 10. But the main use of map method is to transform the data of a given array. In this case, using this map method, we can transform the data of this numbers array. And for that, for each iteration, this map method passes three optional arguments to this callback function. The first argument will be the element of the array on which the map method is currently looping over. So for the first iteration, this element will be assigned with this value 1. For the second iteration, this element will be assigned with this value 4. And for the third iteration, this element will be assigned with this value 9. Since we have only 3 elements in this numbers array, this map method is going to loop over this numbers array 3 times. And for each iteration, it is going to assign the current element to this element variable. The second optional argument which we can pass to this callback function is the index. So this index will be assigned with the index of the element for each iteration. For the first iteration, this map method it is going to assign this 1 to this element parameter, and the index of this element 1 will be 0. So that 0 will be assigned to this index parameter. For the second iteration, this map method is going to assign the value of the second element, which in this case 4, to this element parameter, and the index of this element, which in this case will be 1, to this index parameter. And for the third iteration, 9 will be assigned to this element parameter, and the index of this element is 2. So 2 will be assigned to this index parameter. And the third optional argument is the array itself. So let's call it as ARR. So for each iteration, this map method is also going to assign the original array on which it is looping over to this third parameter. So for the first iteration, it will assign this array to this ARR parameter. For the second iteration also, it will assign this array to this ARR parameter. And for the third iteration also, it will assign this array to this ARR parameter. So for each iteration, the third parameter will be assigned with the original array on which the map method is looping over. And very important to understand here is all these three parameters are optional. If you want, you can omit all of them or any one of them. If you don't want to use this ARR in your code, you can simply go ahead and omit it. If you don't want to use the index of the element in your code, you can omit it. Okay, and in the same way, if you don't want to use the element itself, you can also omit it. But I'm going to keep it here for your reference. Okay, now what do we want to do with each element of this numbers array? How do we want to transform each element of this numbers array? Let's say using this map method, we want to calculate the square of each number inside this numbers array, and we want to return that squared value. So we can write the logic inside the body of this callback function. To calculate this square, what we are going to do is let's create a variable. Let's call it square number, or maybe simply square. And to calculate the square, for each iteration inside this element parameter, we are going to receive the current element. So for first iteration, we will receive 1. For second iteration, we will receive 4. And for the third iteration, we will receive 9. So to calculate the square, we can simply say element multiplied by element. So this is how we want to transform the data. We want to calculate the square of each number in this numbers array. And finally, we want to return that square. So from here, I'm going to return square. And here, let's call this array as squared or square array, whatever you like. With this, if I save the changes, here we have an error because now we have changed the name of the array. So it is now squared. So let's go ahead and let's log squared. Let's save the changes again. And now you will see that the returned array is 1, 16, 81. So basically here in the returned array, which this map method has returned, we have the square of each number from this numbers array. And this is the use of map method. Using the map method, we can transform each element of an array. And one more point I want to make sure that you understand here is these parameter names can be anything. The order matters here, but the name can be anything. For example, here I can call this parameter as EL, this parameter as simply I, and the third parameter as A. So the name of these parameters can be anything, but the order is important. The first parameter will always be assigned with the current element on which the map method is looping over. And the third parameter will always be assigned with the original array on which the map method is looping over. So the names can be anything, but the order in which you specify these parameters, that is important. So the map method is an array method that we use to transform the elements of an array by applying a callback function to each element of the source array. And it returns a new array with the transformed data. And just now we solved that with an example. So the map method takes a source array on which it works. It applies a callback function to each element of the array. The map method basically loops over each element of the array, and on each element it applies the logic which we write inside a callback function. Finally, it returns a new array with the transformed data. Now also remember that map method does not modify the original array. The original array is still intact. Here, the original array is this numbers array. So when we are going to apply the map method on the numbers array, it is not going to modify the original array. Instead, it is going to return us a new array with the transformed data. The original array is still intact. So if I go ahead and if I log the numbers array, the numbers array should not be modified. Okay, and here we have changed the name. So now it should be EL. Let's save the changes now. And you will see that when we are logging squared, it is logging the transformed data, the transformed array returned by the map method. And when we are logging the numbers array, the numbers array is still same. It has not been modified by the map method. So the original array, the source array, does not get modified by the map method. All right, so I hope with this example, now you understand what is map method and what is its use. Now let me go ahead and let me comment this code here, and let's understand map method with another example. Now what we are going to do is we are going to use map method on this names array, and we are going to transform each element of this names array into uppercase. For that, as we learned on the array where we want to transform the data, we are going to call the map method. To this map method, we need to pass a callback function. For the callback function, we can use anonymous function syntax or arrow function syntax. Here I'm going to use arrow function syntax. Okay, and this callback function, it is going to receive three optional parameters: the current element on which the map method is looping over, the index of the element, and also the original array. And again, you can name these parameters anything, but the order is important. And finally, what do we want to do here? We want to transform each element of this names array to uppercase. So for each iteration inside this EL, we are going to get each element. So for the first iteration, this EL will be assigned with John. For the second iteration, it will be assigned with Sarah. And for the third iteration, it will be assigned with Steve. So for each iteration, what we are going to do is we are going to convert each element to uppercase. And finally, we also need to return the value. If we don't return the value, by default, undefined will be returned, and that will be assigned in the new array which this map method will return. So let's create a variable using this const keyword, and let's simply call it as upper or upper names. Let's also go ahead and let's log the upper names. So if I save the changes now, this map method has returned us a new array, and in that array, all element of this names array has been transformed to uppercase, and that array is assigned to this upper names variable. When we are logging it, we can see that an array has been logged, and in that array, all the names which we have in this names array has been converted to uppercase. So this is how we wanted to transform each element of this names array. Now, before we move further, what I also want to show you is the value of this EL, this index, and this ARR for each iteration. So for that, I'm going to use this console.log, and there I'm going to log EL, I'm going to log index, and I'm going to log this ARR. So remember that this callback function which we are passing here, it will be executed for each iteration. If I save the changes, in this names array, we have three elements. So this callback function which we are passing here, it will be executed for 3 times. And each time this callback function is executed, you can see it is logging the element value, this EL. For the first iteration, it is John. For the second iteration, it is Sarah. And for the third iteration, it is Steve. John, Sarah, Steve. Then it is also logging the index of each element. So for John, it is at index 0. As you can see, Sarah, it is at index 1, and Steve, it is at index 2 of the names array. And then for each iteration, it is also logging the original array. So this is the original array. So for each iteration, that original array has also been logged. Okay, and finally, if I don't use this index and ARR, currently I'm using this index and ARR inside this console.log, so I need to specify it. But if I don't use it, in that case, if we want, we can also omit these parameters, because since we are not using it, specifying it here for the callback function is unnecessary. So if I save the changes, the program should still be working. We can still see the transformed array returned by this map method when we have used it on the names array. And finally, let's also understand how we can use the map method of the array on complex types. So for example, we also have this products array here, and it is an array of product objects. So what I want is I want to loop over each element of this products array. And for each product, I want to create a new product object with the product ID, product name, price, and discounted price. Instead of discount, this discount is the percentage of discount applied on the price. So instead of discount, I want to show the discounted price. Let's see how we can do that. So again, on the products array, I'm going to use the map method. To this map method, I'm going to pass a callback function. And for each iteration, this callback function is going to receive the current object. I'll simply call it as prod. So for each iteration, we are going to receive a product object from this products array in this prod parameter. I can also specify the index and array parameter, but since we are not going to use it, I'm not specifying it. And finally, what I want to do, I want to return a new object. So here I'll create that object. In that object, I want to have the ID. ID should be prod.id. So for each product, we will have its ID property. I want to have a name property there. That name I can get from prod.name. I also want to have a price. That price I'll get from prod.price. And finally, instead of discount, I want to have discounted price, this property. And to calculate the discounted price, what we are going to do is from the prod.price, we are going to subtract prod.price multiplied by prod.discount divided by 100. So basically, we are calculating the discount which is provided on the price, and we are subtracting that discount from the price. Okay, and this is the object I want to return for each iteration. So we know that this map method is going to return us an array. Let's go ahead and let's store that array in a variable. Let's call it product details. And now let me go ahead and let me log that product details in the console. If I save the changes, you will see that in the products array, we have 3 products. So here, 3 products have been logged. If I expand each of the product, you'll see that the elements of this product details array is basically the product objects where we have the ID of the product, name of the product, the original price of the product, and the discounted price of the product. So for the first product, the discount is 10%. That means the 10% of 20 will be 2. So that 2 will be subtracted from this 20, and now the discounted price will be 18. So that's what you will see here. In the same way, for the second product, the original price is 15. The percentage discount is 15%. So the 15% of this 15 will be around 2.25. So that has been subtracted from this 15, and the discounted price will be 12.75. And for the third product, the discount is 10%. So 10% of 35 will be 3.5. So 3.5 have been subtracted from 35, and the discounted price is 31.5. Okay. So this is how, using this map method, we can transform the elements of an array. Now remember that in a JavaScript interview, you might be asked what are the 3 transformation methods in JavaScript. There are 3 transformation methods in JavaScript which can be used on an array, and these methods are map, filter, and reduce methods. We have already talked about map method in this lecture. In the next coming lectures, we're also going to talk about the filter method and the reduce method. So map, filter, and reduce. These are the three transformation methods in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, there are three transformation methods which can be applied on an array, and these are map, filter, and reduce. We have already talked about map method. In our coming lectures, we are going to talk about filter and reduce method. Now, why these are called as transformation methods? Because these methods are used to transform an original array and create a new array or a new value from the original array. All right, so this is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.